Welcome back to Mystery Minds, the channel where we dive into the darkest corners of true crime, uncovering stories that shock, intrigue, and leave us questioning the world around us. In today's case, we bring you a chilling and twisted tale, one of power, greed, and deadly alliances. This is the story of sports betting and the Mafia, gambling in the digital age. A tale of unchecked ambition, organized crime, and a digital empire built on manipulation. This case will leave you wondering, how far would someone go for control? And how does a seemingly harmless online hobby lead to murder and betrayal? Stay with us as we unravel the dark and shocking story of sports betting and the Mafia, gambling in the digital age. An empire built on digital bets, a billionaire tech genius entangled with the Mafia, and a deadly game of betrayal and survival. What started as the future of online gambling turned into a web of corruption, rigged outcomes, and cold-blooded murder. But the real question is, how did a single anonymous tip bring down one of the most dangerous crime syndicates? And what happens when the mastermind behind it all vanishes without a trace? In 2018, Ethan Ward, a young tech entrepreneur with a knack for innovation, launched BetMaster, a sleek and intuitive online sports betting platform. It wasn't just another gambling website. Ethan had created a platform driven by cutting-edge algorithms that promised fair play, higher odds of winning, and instant payouts. With flashy advertisements and a viral social media campaign, BetMaster became an overnight sensation, attracting millions of users worldwide. Ethan quickly rose to fame as a visionary in the tech world, a young billionaire celebrated in business magazines and tech summits. The public saw him as a symbol of modern success, ambitious, brilliant, and unstoppable. What they didn't see was the desperate scramble behind the scenes. Despite its massive user base, the company's rapid growth demanded enormous capital to sustain operations, and Ethan was running out of cash. To save his dream, Ethan sought funding from unconventional sources, unknowingly opening the doors to a dangerous world. Among the investors he approached was Marcus the Ghost Leon, a shadowy figure with a reputation for being untouchable. Leon wasn't just a wealthy businessman, he was one of the East Coast Mafia's most powerful and feared leaders. Known for his cunning and ruthlessness, Leon had a knack for turning legitimate businesses into lucrative fronts for his criminal empire. For Ethan, the influx of capital from Leon seemed like a godsend. The money came with no strings attached, or so he thought. At first, the partnership was seamless. Leon's financial backing allowed BetMaster to dominate the online gambling industry. Ethan convinced himself that he could manage the partnership without getting too involved in whatever Leon's true motives might be. But Leon's influence over the company grew quickly. Within months, he began using BetMaster as a vehicle to launder money, funneling millions of dollars through seemingly legitimate betting transactions. He also manipulated the platform's odds to ensure his associates always came out ahead. Ethan, initially oblivious to the scale of Leon's operations, soon found himself entangled in a web he couldn't escape. The pressure mounted as Ethan was pulled deeper into Leon's schemes. He began receiving coded instructions, subtle but unmistakable. Leon's men infiltrated BetMaster's operations, working behind the scenes to ensure their criminal activities went unnoticed. Ethan's role, though passive at first, became increasingly complicit. He was too far in to back out, and the fear of crossing Leon kept him in line. As BetMaster soared to unprecedented heights, Ethan's personal life began to unravel. The weight of the secrets he carried gnawed at him, and his once charismatic demeanor started to crack. His closest confidant and CFO, Ryan Pierce, who had been with Ethan since the beginning, noticed the changes. He had poured his energy into building BetMaster into the juggernaut it had become. Ryan, a meticulous and principled accountant, had always been the moral backbone of the company. He believed in Ethan's vision. Ethan was the visionary, but Ryan was the one who kept the numbers in check. At least that's what he thought until the discrepancies started appearing. At first they were small, almost unnoticeable. A few suspicious transactions buried among legitimate ones, strange account numbers with no traceable origins. But as Ryan dug deeper, the anomalies became impossible to ignore. At first, Ryan dismissed the irregularities as errors, but the patterns were too deliberate to be accidents. Suspicious transactions, accounts with untraceable origins, and inexplicably large payouts began to pile up. Ryan's unease grew, and he started piecing together a troubling picture. He began running late-night audits, combing through financial records and transaction logs. What he found didn't just raise questions, it set off alarm bells. Millions of dollars were being funneled through shadowy accounts that seemed to appear and disappear at will. There were unexplained payouts to users who didn't exist in the system and betting patterns that looked eerily like they had been manipulated. The deeper Ryan went, the more certain he became that BetMaster was involved in something far beyond what he had signed up for. Though he tried to confront Ethan, the latter brushed him off with vague explanations, leaving Ryan more determined to uncover the truth. Meanwhile, Ethan's problems were multiplying. Leon, emboldened by his success with BetMaster, began demanding more from the platform. Fixed games, manipulated odds, and even fraudulent contests became part of the operation. Ethan knew that if anyone ever found out, it would destroy him. Worse, he began to realize that BetMaster was no longer his creation, it was Leon's tool. By the time Ethan fully understood the depth of Leon's control, it was too late. BetMaster had become a critical part of Leon's criminal empire, and Ethan's life was tethered to the Mafia's demands. But the most chilling realization came when a package was delivered to Ethan's office, an unmarked envelope containing a photograph of him with his family. The message was clear: Leon was watching. Ethan now lived in constant fear, walking a tightrope between survival and ruin. The public saw him as a tech prodigy at the height of his success, but behind the scenes he was a man on the edge, trapped in a deadly game he couldn't control. Unbeknownst to him, the cracks in the foundation of his empire were beginning to show, and those closest to him were starting to question his integrity. The stage was set for a devastating fall, but Ethan had no idea how quickly his world would collapse. Ethan Ward's success was becoming harder to celebrate as the months went by. BetMaster continued to rake in millions, but the pressure behind the scenes was suffocating him. Marcus Leon's grip on the company was tightening, and Ethan was caught between the thrill of his empire's meteoric rise and the crushing fear of losing it all. He tried to compartmentalize his life, putting on a confident face for investors and the media while quietly drowning in the weight of his secrets. But cracks were starting to show, and no one noticed them more than Ryan Pierce. Ryan's loyalty to Ethan kept him from jumping to conclusions, but his instincts told him that his friend was hiding something. He tried to broach the topic carefully, hoping Ethan would confide in him, but every conversation ended in vague reassurances and deflections. Ethan, once open and driven, now seemed distracted and defensive. Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that his friend was carrying a heavy burden, one he wasn't willing to share. The turning point came when Ryan discovered a transaction log that linked BetMaster to accounts flagged in a federal database for suspected money laundering. That was when the pieces began to fall into place. Ethan wasn't just struggling with the pressures of running a multi-million-dollar company, he was in over his head with dangerous people. Ryan realized that the suspicious accounts and manipulated bets weren't accidents. They were deliberate moves by someone with the power to pull the strings behind the scenes. Unwilling to confront Ethan directly without concrete evidence, Ryan decided to dig deeper. He reached out to a trusted contact in the financial crimes unit of the FBI, anonymously tipping them off to the irregularities he had found. He believed that if the authorities could intervene, they might be able to expose whatever or whoever was behind the corruption at BetMaster. Ryan's hope was that Ethan could be spared from the fallout if the problem was handled discreetly. But what Ryan didn't know was that his anonymous tip wasn't as secure as he thought. The Mafia had its tentacles in places he couldn't imagine, and word of a potential whistleblower quickly reached Marcus Leon. Lean, ever the tactician, wasn't certain who had turned against him, but he knew it had to be someone inside BetMaster. He also knew how to send a message that would silence any further dissent. Just days after Ryan's tip to the FBI, he vanished. His absence sent a ripple of panic through BetMaster's inner circle, but no one was prepared for what happened next. Ryan's body was discovered in a remote field, executed with a single gunshot to the back of the head. The news hit Ethan like a freight train. He had been suspicious of Ryan's growing curiosity, but he never imagined it would end like this. The guilt was immediate and overwhelming. Ethan knew, without question, that Leon had orchestrated the murder. With Ryan gone, Ethan was more alone than ever. He realized that Leon's reach extended far beyond what he had feared, and any illusion of control he once had was gone. He tried to focus on keeping BetMaster running, but the shadow of Ryan's death loomed over every decision he made. The company's success now felt hollow, built on a foundation of lies and blood. Ethan began to grow paranoid, convinced that he might be next. He hired private security and avoided public appearances, retreating further into isolation. But even as he tried to protect himself, he couldn't escape the reality that he was trapped. Leon's empire didn't tolerate loose ends, and Ethan knew that one wrong move could cost him everything: his company, his freedom, and his life. The FBI had quietly begun their investigation, but Ethan had no idea they were closing in. Nor did he know that the anonymous tip Ryan had sent before his death had put him directly in their sights. As the walls started to close in, Ethan faced an impossible choice: stay loyal to the empire he had helped build, or find a way out before it was too late. Ethan Ward's world was crumbling, even if most people couldn't see it yet. On the surface, BetMaster was still thriving, with millions of users and glowing media coverage about its dominance in the online gambling market. But behind the glossy exterior, the company and Ethan himself were on the brink of collapse. The murder of Ryan Pierce had sent shockwaves through Ethan's life. It wasn't just the loss of his closest friend and most trusted ally, it was a reminder of the brutal consequences of crossing Marcus Lean. Ryan's death was ruled a homicide, but no arrests were made, and the investigation quickly stalled. Ethan knew why. Leon's influence ran deep, and any attempt to implicate him would be met with silence or worse. Ethan couldn't grieve openly; doing so would raise questions he couldn't answer. Instead, he buried himself in his work, trying to maintain the illusion of control while paranoia began to consume him. Every knock at the door, every unknown number on his phone, felt like a threat. Leon's message had been clear: loyalty was non-negotiable. But Ethan was beginning to realize that loyalty wasn't enough to keep him safe. He had tried to keep his distance from Leon's operations, to focus on running the company while turning a blind eye to the criminal activities happening behind the scenes. That was no longer an option. Leon demanded more control over BetMaster, pressuring Ethan to expand their operations into new territories and take bigger risks. Ethan felt like a puppet, with Leon pulling the strings. Meanwhile, cracks in BetMaster's operations were starting to show. Loyal users began complaining about suspicious betting patterns and payouts that didn't make sense. Some accused the platform of being rigged, sparking whispers of a potential scandal. Regulators, already wary of the rapid rise of online gambling, began taking a closer look at the company's practices. Ethan scrambled to address these issues, but he knew that any real scrutiny would uncover the illegal activities Leon had embedded into the platform. As the pressure mounted, Ethan's behavior became increasingly erratic. He rarely slept, spent hours obsessively monitoring the company's systems, and isolated himself from friends and colleagues. The guilt over Ryan's death haunted him, but so did the fear of becoming Leon's next victim. He began to suspect that his every move was being watched, that his phone was tapped, and that his emails were being monitored. He wasn't wrong. Leon had made sure that Ethan couldn't take a single step without his knowledge. Ethan's paranoia was well-founded. The FBI, spurred by the anonymous tip Ryan had sent before his death, had launched a covert investigation into BetMaster. They suspected the platform was being used for money laundering, but they needed more evidence to tie it to the Mafia. Investigators worked quietly, trying to avoid tipping off Leon or his associates. They knew that any misstep could lead to more bloodshed. Unbeknownst to Ethan, the FBI had already identified him as a person of interest. They didn't see him as the mastermind, but as someone who could potentially lead them to Leon. Their plan was to build enough evidence to pressure Ethan into cooperating. But they weren't the only ones keeping tabs on him. Leon had his own network of informants, and it didn't take long for him to learn about the federal probe. Leon's reaction was swift and ruthless. He suspected Ethan might be working with the authorities, even though there was no concrete evidence to support this. For Leon, suspicion was enough. He sent a chilling warning to Ethan, a package delivered to his home containing a single bullet. The message was unmistakable. Ethan was terrified. He realized that he was caught in a no-win situation. If he cooperated with the FBI, Leon would have him killed. If he stayed loyal to Leon, the authorities would eventually take him down, and his life as he knew it would be over. The stress was unbearable, and Ethan began to question his own sanity. Despite his fear, Ethan couldn't ignore the growing threat posed by the FBI's investigation. He tried to cover his tracks, deleting files and wiping servers, but the effort was futile. The more he tried to hide, the more evidence the authorities uncovered. His digital empire, once a symbol of his success, was now a trap he couldn't escape. Ethan's isolation deepened. His employees noticed his absence from key meetings, his erratic decision-making, and his unwillingness to engage with anyone. Investors began to grow nervous, and whispers of internal instability spread through the company. For the first time, Ethan's carefully crafted image as a visionary entrepreneur was beginning to unravel. Loon, ever the strategist, saw Ethan's unraveling as a liability. A man on the edge was a risk, and Leon didn't tolerate risks. Ethan sensed that his time was running out. The walls were closing in, and he had no one left to turn to. But the most dangerous threat wasn't Leon or the FBI. It was the growing sense that no matter what he did, he wouldn't survive the storm that was coming. Ethan Ward's world, once a glittering success story, was now a house of cards teetering on the brink of collapse. The dual pressures from Marcus Leon's Mafia network and the FBI investigation had pushed him to the edge. Every day felt like a countdown to disaster. Leon's men were tightening their grip on BetMaster, demanding more control over operations and threatening to expose Ethan if he didn't comply. Meanwhile, federal agents were circling, gathering evidence and preparing to strike. Ethan was a man trapped between two unstoppable forces, and there was no clear path to safety. The FBI's investigation had gained traction after months of quiet surveillance. They had traced millions of dollars in suspicious transactions directly to BetMaster and linked the platform to known Mafia fronts. Their agents were relentless, piecing together the financial web that connected Ethan to Leon's criminal empire. The evidence against Ethan was mounting, but they needed more. They knew that taking down Leon would require someone on the inside, and Ethan was their best chance. However, they underestimated the reach of Leon's influence. Leon's paranoia had grown alongside the FBI's advances. He knew the investigation was closing in, and his instinct was to eliminate any potential threats, including Ethan. Leon didn't see Ethan as a partner anymore, he was a loose end. The Mafia boss dispatched enforcers to monitor Ethan's every move, ensuring he wouldn't turn against them. Leon's intimidation tactics became more direct. A burned-out car was found outside Ethan's home one morning, a brutal reminder of what would happen if he crossed the line. Ethan was spiraling under the weight of constant surveillance and fear. He barely slept, consumed by nightmares of Leon's men and visions of prison. His once pristine office now looked like a war room, with shredded documents, disconnected monitors, and piles of untouched work. Ethan's health deteriorated rapidly, and his employees began to whisper about the CEO who was unraveling before their eyes. He knew the FBI was closing in, and suspected that Leon would act first. The only question was which side would destroy him first. Desperation forced Ethan to consider the unthinkable, turning himself into the FBI. He wasn't driven by guilt or a desire to make things right, he simply wanted to survive. Ethan believed that cooperating with the authorities might offer him some protection, even if it meant betraying Leon. But this plan carried enormous risks. If Leon found out, Ethan wouldn't live long enough to testify. Still, the alternative, continuing as a pawn in Leon's deadly game, seemed equally grim. Ethan began gathering information, compiling every shred of evidence he could find about Leon's operations. It was a dangerous move. He knew Leon's men were watching him, and any sign of disloyalty could result in his immediate death. Ethan worked in secret, hiding files on encrypted drives and creating a plan to hand everything over to the FBI. He thought he was being careful, but Leon's network was vast and vigilant. They quickly picked up on Ethan's strange behavior, and their suspicions grew. As Ethan prepared to make his move, the FBI took theirs. Federal agents raided BetMaster's headquarters in a high-profile operation that made national headlines. The raid was swift and calculated, targeting key offices and confiscating computers and servers. The sight of agents swarming through the building sent shockwaves through the company, and employees scrambled to distance themselves from the unfolding scandal. Ethan wasn't in the office during the raid, but he watched it unfold on the news, feeling a sick sense of inevitability. The raid wasn't the FBI's only play. They knew Ethan was the key to bringing down Leon, so they made their move to secure him. Agents intercepted him at a private residence he had been using as a safe house. Cornered and exhausted, Ethan didn't resist. He was taken into custody where the FBI laid out their offer: full cooperation in exchange for witness protection and a reduced sentence. They promised to shield him from Leon, but Ethan wasn't convinced. He knew the Mafia's reach extended far beyond prison walls and witness protection programs. Leon's response to the raid was swift and brutal. Several of his associates within BetMaster were silenced, their deaths staged as accidents. It was a warning to anyone else who might consider talking. Ethan, still in FBI custody, was racked with fear. He had given the agents enough information to implicate himself, but not enough to bring down Leon. The agents pressured him for more, but Ethan hesitated, knowing that every word he spoke put him further in Leon's crosshairs. The FBI kept Ethan under heavy guard, but he could feel the walls closing in. Leon's reach was everywhere, and Ethan knew it was only a matter of time before the Mafia found a way to get to him. He began to doubt whether cooperation was the right choice. The fear of being killed by Leon's men was matched only by the fear of being abandoned by the FBI once his usefulness ran out. Ethan's fate hung in the balance. The FBI needed him alive to make their case against Leon, but they couldn't guarantee his safety. Leon's men were already on the move, searching for the informant who had dared to turn against their boss. As Ethan sat in an interrogation room, he realized that no matter what he chose, his survival was far from guaranteed. Ethan Ward's decision to cooperate with the FBI set off a chain reaction he couldn't control. As he sat under constant watch in a secured location, he gave the agents everything they needed: financial records, internal communications, and a detailed account of his dealings with Marcus Leon. The evidence painted a damning picture of a sophisticated money laundering operation hidden behind the success of BetMaster. Ethan, once the golden boy of the tech and gambling industries, was now the FBI's star witness in their pursuit of one of the most powerful mafia figures in the country. The case against Leon began to solidify, but it was clear the FBI was racing against the clock. Leon's network was vast, and the news of Ethan's cooperation had already reached his ears. Despite the FBI's best efforts to keep Ethan's identity hidden, leaks within the system ensured that Leon who had betrayed him. His retaliation was swift. Several key players within BetMaster vanished overnight, either fleeing or meeting a violent end. Leon wasn't just cleaning house, he was sending a message. For Ethan, the threats were no longer abstract. Even under FBI protection, he felt exposed. Every sound outside his safe house, every shadow in the hallway, felt like an impending attack. The agents assured him that he was safe, but Ethan knew better. Leon's men were resourceful, and their reach extended far beyond what the FBI could anticipate. The paranoia that had plagued him for months only deepened, and he began to question whether he would survive long enough to see Leon brought to justice. As the FBI prepared their case, they faced unexpected setbacks. Key witnesses who could corroborate Ethan's testimony either refused to cooperate or disappeared entirely. Bank accounts tied to Leon were suddenly emptied, leaving a trail of dead ends. The Mafia's countermeasures were calculated and relentless, and the FBI realized that Ethan's testimony alone might not be enough. They needed something undeniable that could cripple Leon's empire and tie him directly to the crimes. Ethan, desperate to ensure his survival, offered them exactly that. He revealed the existence of a hidden server farm used by BetMaster to manage the illegal transactions tied to Leon's operations. The servers contained encrypted data that could expose the full extent of the laundering scheme. It was a risky move, one that required a coordinated raid on a facility that Leon's men likely monitored. But the FBI had no choice. It was their best chance to secure a conviction. The raid was a high-stakes operation, carried out in the dead of night. Federal agents stormed the facility, encountering minimal resistance but working against the clock to secure the data before it could be wiped. They succeeded, seizing terabytes of information that painted a damning picture of Leon's control over BetMaster. The encrypted files revealed betting manipulation, money laundering, and even connections to violent crimes that could be traced back to Leon's orders. The FBI now had the evidence they needed, but the operation wasn't without consequences. Leon's retaliation was immediate and brutal. His men launched attacks against those they suspected of being involved, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. Ethan, now the centerpiece of the case against Leon, was moved to a new location under even stricter security measures. The FBI knew that keeping him alive was critical, but they also knew that Leon wouldn't stop until Ethan was silenced. The trial that followed was one of the most high-profile cases in recent history. Ethan took the stand, his testimony exposing the inner workings of BetMaster and its ties to Leon's criminal empire. The courtroom was a spectacle, with media coverage broadcasting every detail to a captivated public. Ethan's words were damning, and the evidence presented by the FBI left little room for doubt. Leon, once untouchable, now faced the full weight of the law. But victory came at a cost. Ethan's cooperation earned him a reduced sentence, but it also marked the end of his life as he knew it. Placed in witness protection, he disappeared into anonymity, leaving behind the empire he had built and the name he had once been proud of. He was alive, but his freedom was an illusion, constantly looking over his shoulder for the shadow of Leon's reach. Leon, despite the overwhelming evidence, wasn't completely defeated. While he was convicted and sentenced to life in prison, his empire remained intact. Loyal associates continued to run his operations, adapting and evolving to evade law enforcement. Ethan's testimony had brought a momentary victory, but it was clear that the war was far from over. In the end, Ethan was left to grapple with the consequences of his ambition. He had built BetMaster with dreams of revolutionizing the gambling industry, but his choices had turned it into a tool for corruption and violence. His story became a cautionary tale, a reminder of how quickly success can turn into ruin when greed and power collide. For Ethan, the price of survival was steep, and the question of whether it had been worth it would haunt him for the rest of his days. And that concludes today's case on Mystery Minds. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. What do you think happened to Ethan? Was he a victim of circumstance, or did his own greed seal his fate? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious, stay cautious, and always question the world around you. This is Mystery Minds signing off.